Minas Morgul, home to the Nazgul and a symbol of terror and corruption. But it was not always this way. It once was a proud city of Gondor called Minas Ithil, before it fell to the enemy. In today's episode, we'll explore its history and some of its characteristics. In the year 3319 of the Second Age, following the fall of Númenor, Elendil and his two sons, Anarion and Isildur, led 7 Númenorian ships to Middle-earth. Here they established the northern kingdom of Arnor and the southern kingdom of Gondor. During this time period, the Dark Lord Sauron had returned to Mordor, and so, in the year 3320 of the Second Age, the Númenorians built Minas Ithil near the base of the Mountains of Shadow, Ephel Duat. Its location was of incredible strategic importance as it overlooked the most easily accessible path into Mordor through the mountains, and so it would raise the alarm if any foes passed through, and it would attempt to inhibit their progress or even stop them entirely. Its name, Minas Ithil, is Elvish, Sindarin to be precise, that translates into the Tower of the Moon, which was quite appropriate as it was said that the moon lit up the city with its silver light, and that this light was absorbed and reflected off the marble walls, giving it a majestic white glow. The front of the city was surrounded by a stream, and there was a bridge that crossed the stream that led to the city entrance. We're told that there were large meadows gracing both sides of the stream. Within the city, Minas Ithil had one tall tower that stood out amongst the others, which might seem like an insignificant detail, but keep it in mind as it undergoes a very interesting change once it's corrupted by the Nazgul. Anyway, Minas Ithil was said to be the twin city of Minas Anor, later known as Minas Tirith, and there is often some confusion around this. When Minas Ithil and Minas Anor are compared structurally, their designs differ significantly, which makes the word twin seem like an odd choice. However, I think they were called twins due to other connections that they shared. For example, Minas Anor translates into the Tower of the Sun, while Minas Ithil is the Tower of the Moon. They were both built during the same period of time. Both are surrounded by mountains, and they both hosted princes of Númenor, as Isildur resided in Minas Ithil, while Anarion, his younger brother, resided in Minas Anor. It was outside his house in Minas Ithil that Isildur planted a sapling of the White Tree, one that he rescued from Númenor before its downfall. He also had one of the Palantir in the highest tower, which he probably used to communicate with his brother and father, since they all had one in their respective cities. Anarion's in Minas Anor, and Elendil's in the city of Anúminas, the capital of the Northern Kingdom. The city of Minas Ithil stood unconquered for over 100 years. However, in the year 3429 of the Second Age, Sauron sent his forces to attack it, and he successfully captured it. Following his conquest, Sauron chose to burn the White Tree of Minas Ithil. However, Isildur managed to escape before the city fell, and he took a sapling of the tree with him. Despite Sauron's victory, his rule over Minas Ithil was short-lived. For some time between the years 3433 and 3434, the last alliance of elves and men had been rallied, and they successfully recaptured the city. Isildur left his two sons, Aratan and Cirion, in Minas Ithil to prevent Sauron from escaping from Mordor, while he went with the rest of his forces to besiege Barad-dûr and defeat Sauron. In the year 3441 of the Second Age, the last alliance was victorious, and Sauron had been defeated. Isildur chose to replant the sapling of the White Tree in Minas Anor instead of Minas Ithil, in memory of his brother Anarion, who was killed during the siege of Barad-dûr. He then chose to rule the northern realm of Arnor as his father had perished, and the rule of Minas Ithil fell to his nephew, Anarion's son Meneldil, who ruled over the southern kingdom of Gondor. The city of Minas Ithil persisted for over 1,000 years after this, though it slowly declined, as did the rest of Gondor. One of the worst tragedies which hastened its demise was the Great Plague that occurred in the year 1636 of the Third Age, which decimated its population. It's believed that this plague originated from lands to the east of Mordor, and that Sauron had caused it, though this is never confirmed. During this time period, the Witch-King established the realm of Angmar, and he laid waste to the northern kingdom of Arnor. His army was eventually defeated by Prince Eärnur of Gondor and elven forces led by Círdan and Elrond. The Witch-King fled back to Mordor, and he gathered the other Ringwraiths to him. In the year 2000 of the Third Age, the Ringwraiths laid siege to Minas Ithil, and after 2 years they were victorious, and the Witch-King once again had a realm to rule. The majestic city of Minas Ithil was renamed to Minas Morgul, which meant the Tower of Sorcery, and it was corrupted and twisted. Its palantir was captured and sent to Barad-dûr, where Sauron would use it up till his defeat with the ring's destruction. Now for the next few parts of this video, I'm going to be using quite a few quotes, not because it's impossible to summarize them, but I feel that the descriptions of Minas Morgul and its surroundings are incredibly beautiful and poetic in Tolkien's writings, and I'd like to share them with you. Keep in mind the original description of Minas Ithil, for we'll now discuss the changes that the Nazgul's presence and magic brought to it. Regarding the green meadows, these were warped, as we're told, wide flats lay on either bank, shadow meads filled with pale white flowers. Luminous they were too, beautiful and yet horrible of shape, like the demented forms in an uneasy dream, and they gave forth a sickening charnel smell. An odour of rottenness filled the air. The stream also was corrupted. The water flowing beneath was silent, and it steamed, but the vapour that rose from it, curling and twisting about the bridge, was deadly cold. Frodo felt his sense reeling and his mind darkening. Several statues were erected on the bridge, and we're told that they were carven with cunning in forms, human and bestial, but all corrupt and loathsome. Whether these statues were corrupted from the original design of Minas Ithil, or if they were later built by order of the Witch-King is unknown. However, considering the theme of corruption, I believe it was the former. There also seems to be some deep mist around the area, as we're told, chill grey mists that no gleam of sunset touched. There it seemed to Frodo that he descried far off, floating as it were on a shadowy sea, the high dim tops and broken pinnacles of old, forlorn and dark. The city still retained its property of reflecting light, yet this too was twisted. All was dark about it, earth and sky, but it was lit with light, not the imprisoned moonlight welling through the marble walls of Minas Ithil long ago, tower of the moon, fair and radiant in the hollow of the hills. Paler indeed than the moon ailing in some eclipse was the light of it now, wavering and blowing like a noisome exhalation of decay. A corpse light, a light that illuminated nothing. I feel there is also an element of sickness to it, particularly Tolkien's choice of words such as the moon ailing and the corpse light. And I really like the film's depiction of this, giving it an eerie, sickly green glow. The tall tower that had once stood in Minas Ithil was also changed. Tower windows showed, like countless black holes looking inward into emptiness. But the topmost course of the tower revolved slowly, first one way and then another, a huge ghostly head leering into the night. It seems that this tower was infused with some magic that made the top of it move around, and that it was transformed to look like a leering head. Now this property is never mentioned when Minas Ithil was uncorrupted, so I assume the Witch-King's magic made it this way. I like to think that it was a taunt to the rest of Gondor, particularly Minas Anor, a hint at its future fate once Sauron conquered it. Anyway, the prince that I mentioned before, Prince Eärnur, eventually became king once his father passed away, and he never forgot the Witch-King's taunts, and how he had laid waste to the northern kingdom of Arnor. King Eärnur was said to be very rash and loved battle, and the Witch King was quick to exploit this. He issued out 2 challenges to King Eärnur for a one-on-one duel. The first one he declined due to his steward's advice. However, 7 years later, in the year 2050, he accepted the second challenge due to pride, and he rode off with several knights to Minas Morgul. After riding past the gates of Minas Morgul, he was never seen or heard from again, and we don't know whether he was killed in the duel, or ambushed, or perhaps even turned into a thrall of the Witch King. Since he died earless, the rule of Gondor fell to his steward, Mardel, and this started the rule of the stewards. Throughout the rest of this age, Minas Morgul became the main base of operation for the orc attacks on Gondor. However, it seems that the orcs that resided in Minas Morgul were a different force than those that came from Mordor, as instead of using the Eye of Sauron on their banner, they chose instead a skeletal crescent moon to represent Minas Morgul. During the War of the Ring, Frodo passes close to Minas Morgul before he ascends the winding stair. Here the Witch King, or perhaps the city's dark magic, seems to draw Frodo, as we're told. Then suddenly, as if some force were at work other than his own will, he began to hurry, tottering forward, his groping hands held out, his head lolling from side to side. Frodo passed his hand over his brow and wrenched his eyes away from the city on the hill. The luminous tower fascinated him, and he fought the desire that was on him to run up the gleaming road towards its gate. At last, with an effort, he turned back, and as he did so, he felt the ring resisting him. Weariness, and more than weariness, oppressed him. It seemed as if a heavy spell was laid on his mind and body. Since we're told that the ring resisted his attempts to turn back, I feel it's more likely that he was drawn to the call of the Nazgul. However, it's possible that the magic and corruption of Minas Morgul corrupted his mind, making him more prone to this effect, as he was less able to think clearly. When the forces of Mordor set forth to attack Gondor during the War of the Ring, Mordor seems to send a signal in the sky consisting of a red flash. This call to war is answered by Minas Morgul. As we're told, there was a flare of livid lightnings, forks of blue flame springing up from the tower and from the encircling hills into sullen clouds. During the War of the Ring, when Aragorn led the forces of the West to the Black Gates, they first passed by Minas Morgul. They found it to be dark and lifeless, and that the orcs and creatures of Mordor that had dwelled there had been destroyed in the Battle of Pelennor Fields, and the Nazgul were elsewhere. It had been abandoned, yet they chose not to occupy it, for the air of the valley was heavy with fear and enmity. Instead, they chose to break the bridge and set the fields aflame. At Aragorn's coronation, after the forces of the West were victorious, he declared that Minas Morgul would be utterly destroyed, and that no man may dwell there for many long years. Now, whether Minas Morgul is ever fully cleansed and if it was ever rebuilt as Minas Ithil is unknown. However, I believe that with time its corruption would have decreased somewhat, but men would still avoid living there, partly due to its history and its possible remaining corruption, and partly because it was no longer required, as it had been primarily built as a watch over Mordor, and following Sauron's defeat, it would no longer have served this purpose. However, this is my own speculation, and I'm very interested to hear what you think. There are 2 more points that I'd like to make. Firstly, apart from the winding stair that led to Cirith Ungol, there was another passage into Mordor that avoided the Black Gate. This was called the Low Pass or the Morgul Pass, and one could reach it after crossing the Morgul Bridge. When Aragorn led the host of the West to Mordor, they discussed whether they should first occupy Minas Morgul and then travel via this road into Mordor, instead of approaching the Black Gate. However, they decided not to proceed with this plan for 2 reasons. Firstly, Gandalf said that the evil that dwelt in the valley would turn the minds of living men to madness and horror. And secondly, he wanted to avoid the spot since Frodo had planned to travel via the High Pass into Cirith Ungol, and so if they chose to use the Low Pass, Sauron's attention would be diverted there, which might have compromised Frodo's quest into Mordor. The second point I'd like to make is concerning what was inside Minas Morgul. I find this type of eerie, twisted environments extremely interesting in the Lord of the Rings mythos, and I always used to wonder what unspeakable horrors dwelt within its walls. Now we're never given any details about this. However, in the History of Middle-earth books, namely the Treason of Isengard, we can see an early draft that Tolkien had written, in which Gollum betrays Frodo, who was then caught and taken to some dungeons in Minas Morgul before being freed by Sam. They then dress up as orcs and sneak around Minas Morgul, avoiding orc patrols, before making their way to Mordor. This scene is very similar to what happens in Cirith Ungol, and it most likely was moved there. I thought I'd mention it, as I'm quite glad Tolkien decided against this narrative, cause it would have significantly decreased the mystery and horror surrounding Minas Morgul if it was merely filled with orcs. Anyway friends, this wraps up the video and I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to know if you think Minas Morgul was ever re-inhabited, and your ideas about the horrors that might have lived there. As always, if you can, leave a like, cause it helps this channel immensely, and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we can once again explore the wonderful world and lore of Middle-earth.